Hey guys, welcome back to Scary Stories with Sai. So, I know it's been a minute, and I'm a little bit behind on getting out these movie reviews like I was talking about, but it's been a little bit of a hectic time, but we're finally here. And this week, for our very first one, we're going to be diving into the 2006 movie Silent Hill. Now, Silent Hill is a movie based off of the popular video game franchise, which itself is inspired loosely by real events from an abandoned town called Centralia, Pennsylvania. Kind of. And I really mean kind of. But I'll get into that in a little bit. First things first, I'll keep the first part of everything spoiler-free for anyone who wants to go and watch the movie without knowing too much beforehand. Since most of the movies that I'm going to be covering are older ones that I feel like should be revisited, I'll give a heads up before I dive into anything spoilery. So you have time to bail, and if you want to, you can totally, I will never be offended by that. But as for the plot, and I really mean the base plot of Silent Hill, it follows a mother, Rose, as she searches for her adopted daughter in a hellish nightmare town full of fog, monsters, and a whole lot of things that shouldn't exist. And even if they did exist, definitely shouldn't exist like that. But it's pretty much a hellscape that does not want her to succeed. So here's a bit of background information on the movie. The movie Silent Hill came out in 2006, and truthfully, like most video game adaptations, it didn't exactly blow any critics away. It has a 32% score on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics, but it did a little bit better with audiences sitting at 63%. Now, to help set the tone, Deborah Unger, who plays Dahlia in the film, had this to say after reading the script for the very first time. It reads like Alice in Wonderland meets Dante's Inferno. And truthfully, I think that's a pretty perfect way to describe the twisted, hellish world they created in this movie. Now, the movie really digs into themes of guilt, uncertainty, and redemption as it drags you through the town. And for its time, given the resources they had, I personally feel like they did a pretty solid job at pulling everything off. The set design was a very big part of making this work. Now, each set had 4 different versions. One for the past, present, one for the fog, and the dark, nightmare, hellish version that they needed for when the creatures came out to play. They really went all out to make sure that everything felt like it was shifting and changing with the tone of the story. One of the things that stands out the most about Silent Hill is that it doesn't rely on jump scares or anything like over-the-top gore related. Now, that to be said, there is gore in this movie. There's quite a bit of it, just not like what you would imagine in like Terrifier. Instead, it builds tension through discomfort and confusion and a sense of dread that slowly creeps up on you. The kind of dread where you're not even sure what's real anymore. What's in her head? What's real? Is it in her head at all? That's what makes this movie so effective. It doesn't really rush you into the horror, it drags you into it and leaves you squirming in your seat. Visually, this film is, I don't feel like it's that far of a stretch to say that this film is a visual masterpiece. Even nearly 20 years ago, the practical effects and setup designs really hold up. They blend practical effects with CGI that, for especially 2006, does not feel overly artificial, which was really impressive for the time period. Back then, CGI was starting to be overused in movies, and Silent Hill avoids that pitfall. It thrives on its atmosphere, and a huge part of that is how the town itself feels like a living, breathing character. Constantly watching and lurking and seeing how it itself changes. So, the movie is, like I mentioned, kind of based off of real-life events. Silent Hill takes some inspiration from the real-life town Centralia, Pennsylvania. Now, I did an episode on this a lot earlier, but just to kind of briefly touch over it, Silent Hill, or Centralia, was a small town that was abandoned in the 1980s because of an underground coal mine fire that's now still burning to this day. It's a ghost town, and that eerie, abandoned vibe is definitely captured in the film. The town in Silent Hill feels like a place trapped in time, suffocated by the past, kind of. I mean, characters are kind of like that too. But here's where the movie gets a little wonky. The plot feels like it's trying to do a lot, and while it touches on some really strong themes, it gets kind of lost in its own twists and turns. The game itself was supposed to be an amalgamation of Silent Hills 1, 2, and 3, but by the time you reach the end, it's less about scarring you and more about piecing together all of the mystery. They really tried to go with that climactic ending that just kind of didn't really feel perfect. Some people love that what the heck did I just watch kind of feeling, but for others, it might leave you feeling frustrated or confused by how certain things happened and the unexplained endings that were left open to interpretation. But before we dive into the spoiler section of everything, here's my quick verdict on the film. I personally feel like Silent Hill is a visually stunning, atmospheric horror film that nails tension and unease atmosphere. The performances, especially by Radha Mitchell as Rose, was fantastic. You can feel the anxiety that she produces as a character. The film captures the core themes of the game as well. However, the plot can get bogged down in its own mythology, and the pacing might leave some viewers a little bit lost. But if you're a fan of the video game or just into psychological horror in general, I definitely think that this one is worth checking out. Now, spoiler alert. If you haven't seen the movie yet and you don't want it ruined, now's your chance to bail. Gonna give it a couple seconds, but okay. So, here's the thing. The movie takes bits and pieces from the first 3 Silent Hill games, and it works okay for what it is. But as a diehard fan of the games, I feel like it could have been more. In my opinion, if this wasn't called Silent Hill and just had a different name with a similar storyline, I feel like the movie would have done much better with audiences who weren't necessarily comparing it to the source material. I feel like it was too far off from the original source material to be an actual video game adaptation, but not a bad film within itself. I'll admit the practical effects, like the janitor crawling around in the bathroom, were top-notch, like fantastic. And the transitions with that they used the CGI in the same time to kind of show how everything changed from the happy town to the dark twisted was pretty well done. But the story sometimes felt forced. Like, as Rose's whole reason for going to Silent Hill is because her daughter keeps screaming the name in her sleep and is showing obvious trauma connections to the town. And while I totally understand wanting to get help for your child, that just didn't really feel like an actual plot introduction, and it just felt like a how can we get this story going. The whole climax revealing the whole Alyssa split thing was impactful, but wasn't exactly how it went in the games. In the game, Cheryl isn't per se a reincarnation of Alyssa. She's more like the pure side of Alyssa, separated from the darker, vengeful side. Not like it's complicated, but the twist is that Cheryl is actually Alyssa's physical body, which was taken by Harry. By the end of the game, Harry confronts the true form of Alyssa to stop the cult's plans. In the movie, Sharon is definitely the reincarnation of Alyssa, which is a much more straightforward interpretation to the video game. So, like, the idea of the reincarnation exists, but it felt more like the movie was using it as a way of wrapping up loose endings rather than actually running the storyline. Fun fact, just random fun fact, the janitor and Pyramid Head were actually played by the same person. And apparently, the days that they filmed the Pyramid Head scenes were a lot of actors' favorite days, specifically the women. Because the actor that played Pyramid Head is apparently not all that bad looking, and they told him he wasn't allowed to use baby powder on his backside. So when he walked by, let's just say everything was visible, and they definitely got to look at those booty cheeks. But it was just a fun thing. At the end of the day, this movie felt more like a psychological thriller than a straight-up horror movie. It keeps you on edge throughout, but it doesn't really have those big jump scares that you might expect from a traditional horror film. It's more about the constant dread and creepy atmosphere, especially with the thick fog. The concept of, like, you walk 1 foot in front of your face and you're possibly going to run into one of those creatures. So, going off of the whole Pyramid Head thing, another funny thing is the armless creature that they had at the beginning that was kind of wandering through had a nickname. They called them the Trojan Man. I don't really feel like I need to go into more detail. Those things were weird looking, but apparently were actual real suits that would go over the actor, and they would just, yeah. I mean, the practical effects that they ran for this movie were so well done. Some of the things that I forgot to even talk about that I had wanted to mention was like that infamous scene where Pyramid Head's walking up the staircase, picks up the woman and rips off her skin. That was real. Like, obviously not a real person, and obviously, but they had a person off to the side with like a little stick that they were pushing up this like almost mannequin with a fake skin on it, that the guy that was playing Pyramid Head, who was actually wearing that big thing, would grab the piece and rip it off. I just thought that was very well done, in my opinion, and a way that I didn't exactly expect. Researching for this movie was really fun to learn about. Overall, I'd say I'd give this one a 7 out of 10. It's a solid horror movie that definitely has its moments, but could have been a lot more if it had been a little bit more creative with the source material. Now, I always recommend you go watch the movie afterwards, so let me know what you guys think, and I'll have a poll in the comments for whether or not you enjoyed the movie Silent Hill. See you guys next time.